Hi everyone, my name is Mark, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Today we're diving into the murder of Christina Harris, and let me tell you right off the bat, this case will make your blood boil. We're talking about a woman who was killed by her own husband using something as innocent as a bowl of cereal. Yeah, you heard that right. A bowl of cereal became a murder weapon, and the level of premeditation and cold calculation behind this crime is just beyond comprehension. This story takes place in Davison, Michigan, a small city where families are supposed to feel safe in their own homes, but sometimes the greatest danger comes from within, and Christina Harris learned that in the most tragic way possible. Let's start by talking about who Christina was, because she deserves to be remembered for the incredible person she was, not just as a victim of this heinous crime. Christina Ann Thompson Harris, who went by Christy, was 36 years old when she was murdered in September 2014. She was described by all accounts as an incredibly loving mother to her two children, including a 4-month-old daughter. Think about that for a second. She had an infant baby who was only 4 months old. This woman was literally in the thick of motherhood, caring for a newborn, while also raising another child. Christina had just been promoted to manager of the Subway sandwich shop inside Ascension Genesis Hospital in nearby Grand Blanc Township. The shop was reportedly the busiest Subway in all of Genesee County, which tells you something about Christina's work ethic and capabilities. She was described as a mentor to her co-workers, a leader, and most importantly, an enduring friend. But what really stands out about Christina is what kind of mother she was. She was breastfeeding her infant daughter and was incredibly careful about what substances she put into her body. This detail is going to become absolutely crucial to this case, so remember that. Christina was the kind of person who put family first. She loved spending time with her children, swimming, crafting, and having family game nights. She was living what should have been one of the happiest times of her life. She had 2 beautiful children, a successful career, and what appeared to be a stable home life. But appearances can be deceiving, and behind closed doors, Christina's marriage was anything but stable. Her co-workers at the hospital Subway knew her as someone who would never touch drugs, let alone something as dangerous as heroin. She was health conscious, responsible, and dedicated to her children's well-being. Everyone who knew Christina understood that she took being a mother seriously and would never do anything to jeopardize her ability to care for her babies. And that's what makes what happened to her so much more disturbing. Christina's mother told authorities that her daughter's marriage to Jason Harris had been rocky. Now, when I say rocky, I'm talking about the kind of relationship problems that go way beyond normal marital disputes. Jason Harris had been corresponding via emails and photos with other women both before and after his wife's death. We're not just talking about innocent conversations here. This man was carrying on full-blown affairs while his wife was home caring for their infant daughter. And get this, investigators found a total of 5,881 text messages to one woman in Rhode Island on Jason Harris's phone. Let me repeat that. Nearly 6,000 text messages to another woman. That's not a casual friendship or even an emotional affair. That's a full-blown relationship. According to witnesses, Christina had discovered texts to this woman on her husband's cell phone prior to her death. So Christina knew about at least some of Jason's cheating. Can you imagine how that must have felt? You're home with a 4-month-old baby, trying to keep your family together, and you discover your husband is basically in a relationship with another woman. But here's where this gets even more disturbing. Jason Harris bought an airline ticket to Providence, Rhode Island, to visit this other woman just 9 days after his wife died. 9 days. His wife's body was barely cold, and this piece of garbage was already making travel plans to see his mistress. And it gets worse. Testimony at trial revealed that Jason Harris moved another woman into his home just 2 months after Christina Harris's death. 2 months. This man replaced his dead wife faster than most people replace their car insurance. The disrespect is just staggering. While Christina's family was still grieving and trying to process their loss, Jason was already moving on like nothing had happened. What investigators discovered about Jason Harris in the months leading up to Christina's death is absolutely chilling. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of rage. This was a carefully planned execution that took months to orchestrate. Jason's co-workers started coming forward with disturbing stories about conversations they'd had with him. One co-worker told authorities Jason Harris asked him for Xanax, an anxiety medication, about a month before Christina Harris died. The man said he gave Jason Harris 5 of the pills. But here's where it gets really dark. This co-worker then said Jason told him he put the Xanax pills in Christina's water, but after tasting it, she wouldn't drink it anymore. So Jason asked him, "Well, what pills are tasteless?" Let me repeat that. Jason Harris was asking his coworkers what drugs are tasteless. This wasn't a one-time conversation, this was premeditation. Another coworker said Jason Harris also quizzed him on what drugs are odorless and tasteless. The man said prior to Christina Harris's death, Jason Harris told him about previously putting pills in his wife's food and drinks to knock her out. This sick individual was literally experimenting on his wife, trying to find the right combination of drugs to incapacitate her without her knowing. And when the pills didn't work because she could taste them, he moved on to something else. Can you imagine living with someone who's secretly drugging your food and drinks? Christina had no idea that the person she trusted most in the world was treating her like a lab rat, testing different substances to see what would work best to harm her. But the drug experiments weren't Jason's only plan. The same co-worker told investigators Jason Harris told him he'd hired a hitman in August 2014, the month before his wife's death. The hit never happened because the alleged hitman, who was on parole, was arrested for carrying a gun while he was doing surveillance on Christina Harris. So not only was Jason drugging his wife's food and drinks, but he had literally tried to hire someone to kill her. When that plan fell through because his hitman got arrested, he decided to take matters into his own hands. Jason also allegedly attempted to hire 2 separate people, including a former co-worker, to murder his wife for $5,000. This man was actively shopping around for someone to murder the mother of his children. Think about the level of planning that went into this. Jason wasn't just angry or frustrated with his marriage, he was systematically exploring every possible way to eliminate his wife. When the hitman plan failed, when the Xanax in the water didn't work, he kept trying until he found something that would. Here's what really tells you everything you need to know about Jason Harris. His own family knew he was dangerous. Jason Harris's brother and sister went to the Davison Police Department just days after their sister-in-law's death and told investigators their brother had talked of getting rid of Christina. His own siblings felt compelled to warn police that Jason might be responsible for his wife's death. Both brother and sister felt Jason Harris was seeing other women outside of the marriage prior to Christina's death, and they were right. But more importantly, they had heard him talking about wanting to get rid of his wife, and they took that seriously enough to go to the police. When your own family members are warning the police about you, that should tell you something about what kind of person you're dealing with. Jason's siblings knew he was capable of murder, and they tried to do the right thing by speaking up. September 28, 2014 started like any other Sunday for Christina Harris. Christina's mother had been at the couple's home most of the day and said her daughter was in good spirits. This detail is important because it directly contradicts what Jason would later tell police about Christina being sick. That evening, according to Jason's own account to police, Christina was feeling hungry. Several people told police that Harris described the night before his wife's death as her being hungry, so he poured her a bowl of cereal. Seems innocent enough, right? A husband making his wife a simple bowl of cereal. But this wasn't just any bowl of cereal. One of the neighbors told authorities Jason Harris said he'd given his wife a bowl of cereal the night before, but that in the middle of eating it, she dropped it unexpectedly on the floor and passed out. Now think about this for a minute. You're eating cereal, and suddenly you just drop the bowl and pass out? That doesn't happen from being tired or having a cold. That's what happens when someone drugs you. During trial testimony, Jason Harris told investigators he had served his wife a bowl of cereal the evening of September 28, 2014, and she had difficulty holding onto her spoon. He had to help her get to bed, and they both went to sleep. But Christina never woke up. Jason claimed that when he woke up the next morning, Christina was still sleeping and seemed to be in a restless sleep, coughing but not responsive. He said he left for work with their 2 children, leaving Christina in bed. What kind of husband leaves for work when his wife is unresponsive and coughing? Any normal person would stay home or call for medical help, but Jason had a plan, and that plan required him to be somewhere else when Christina's body was discovered. When his wife didn't respond to texts, Jason Harris said he asked a neighbor to go check on her. Around 10 a.m. on the morning of September 29, Jason Harris called a neighbor and asked her to check on his wife, which the neighbor told authorities was unusual. When the neighbor went into the Harris home, which was unlocked, she found Christina Harris unresponsive in bed. The woman summoned a second neighbor, who was a nurse. The second neighbor confirmed Christina Harris was dead, and they called 911. The neighbor discovered Christina Harris cold to the touch and unresponsive. First responders later pronounced her dead. Just like that, Christina Harris was gone. A 36-year-old mother of 2, found dead in her own bed by a concerned neighbor. And initially, it looked like a tragic accident. But there were already red flags. The neighbor thought it was unusual for Jason to ask her to check on Christina. Jason had claimed Christina was sick, but her own mother had been with her the day before and said she seemed perfectly fine. The medical examiner had classified Christina Harris's death in 2014 as an accidental overdose. Case closed, right? Tragic accident. Woman overdoses on heroin. End of story. But there was one huge problem with that theory. Nobody who knew Christina believed for 1 second that she would use heroin. Her family refused to accept that and urged the police to dig deeper. And thank God they did, because what happened next is exactly why families should never give up fighting for their loved ones. 2 days after her death, Christina Harris's family members went to the Davison Police Department to complain that something wasn't right. They said she didn't use drugs and felt the case needed to be investigated further. Christina's co-workers were some of the first people to sound the alarm after her death, saying she would never have used illegal drugs. These weren't just family members being defensive. These were people who worked with Christina every single day, and they knew this wasn't right. The family's persistence is what ultimately led to justice in this case. They could have accepted the medical examiner's ruling and tried to move on with their grief. Instead, they kept fighting, kept pushing, kept demanding answers. Christina's mother, Kathy Mills, was later honored as Victim Advocate of the Year for refusing to give up on finding justice for her daughter. This is where this case gets really interesting from a forensic standpoint, and where Christina's dedication to being a good mother ended up being the key to solving her murder. Investigators discovered breast milk that Christina had frozen for her 8-month-old baby. Now, if Christina was a regular drug user, traces of those drugs would show up in her breast milk. A sample of Christina Harris's breast milk, which she had previously stored in her freezer to feed her infant child, was tested and came back negative for any trace of controlled substances. It marked the first time Michigan officials had used breast milk as evidence in a criminal case. Think about how groundbreaking this was, using a mother's own breast milk to prove her innocence and expose her killer. A forensic crime lab eventually tested several samples of Christina's breast milk and found no traces of illegal narcotics, which indicated that she was not a habitual drug user. This evidence was absolutely devastating to any theory that Christina had accidentally overdosed. Here was scientific proof that this woman didn't use drugs, period. So how the hell did she end up with a lethal dose of heroin in her system? The breast milk evidence was the smoking gun that proved Christina Harris was murdered. It showed that she wasn't using drugs, which meant someone else had to have given her the heroin that killed her. Once investigators realized they were dealing with a homicide, they started looking much more closely at Jason Harris, and what they found was absolutely damning. In August 2019, the Genesee County Medical Examiner changed the cause of death from accidental to homicide, which allowed police and prosecutors to pursue a murder charge. It took 5 years, but the evidence was finally strong enough to move forward. Investigators started building their case methodically. They interviewed Jason's co-workers and learned about his questions regarding tasteless, odorless drugs. They discovered his attempts to hire hitmen. They uncovered his extensive communications with other women. They also learned that Jason Harris had been fired from his factory job for testing positive for drugs, which explained how he might have had access to heroin in the first place. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. Jason Harris had planned and executed his wife's murder, and he'd done it in one of the most cowardly ways possible, by poisoning her food. On Tuesday, August 27, 2019, armed with all this evidence, authorities finally arrested Jason Harris and charged him with murder. Jason Harris, 44, of Davison, was charged with premeditated first-degree murder, solicitation of murder, and delivery of a controlled substance causing death. Prosecutor David Layton said during a news conference, "We believe Jason Harris murdered his wife. We believe he put heroin in her cereal and milk the night she died." After 5 years of investigation, Christina's family was finally going to get their day in court. The man who had killed their daughter, sister, and mother was going to face justice. So why did Jason Harris want his wife dead? It all comes down to money, convenience, and pure selfishness. Jason Harris benefited financially from his wife's death. Harris, who had been fired from his factory job for testing positive for drugs, collected $120,000 in insurance money after Christina Harris's death. Prosecutors alleged that Jason received $120,000 in life insurance payouts and that another woman had moved into their house only 2 weeks after Christina's death. They also believed he did not want to divorce the mother of his children to avoid paying child support or alimony, and also because he feared losing his children. This piece of garbage didn't want to go through a divorce because he'd have to pay child support and alimony. He'd rather murder his wife than pay to support his own children. And by killing Christina instead of divorcing her, he got to keep the kids and collect $120,000 in life insurance money. It's the most cold, calculated, selfish motive you can imagine. He literally murdered the mother of his children for money and convenience. Jason also wanted the freedom to continue his affairs without the complications of a divorce. He wanted to have his cake and eat it too, keep his children, avoid financial responsibilities, collect insurance money, and move his girlfriend into the family home. The case was tried in circuit court by Assistant Prosecutor Rebecca Jerva Brin. Jason Harris was found guilty by a jury on November 17, 2021 for first-degree premeditated murder. Jason Thomas Harris, 47, of Davison, was found guilty Wednesday of first-degree murder, solicitation of murder, and delivery of a controlled substance causing death. The evidence against Jason was overwhelming. You had the breast milk proving Christina didn't use drugs. You had multiple witnesses saying Jason had talked about getting rid of his wife. You had co-workers saying he asked about tasteless, odorless drugs. You had evidence of the hitman plot. You had evidence of his affairs. You had the $120,000 insurance payout and the girlfriend moving in 2 months later. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was premeditated murder in the first degree, and the jury saw right through Jason's lies and manipulation. Genesee County Prosecutor David Layton reflected after the verdict. This was a very tragic case, and my heart goes out to the family and friends of Christina Harris. The circumstances of this case make for a unique story and garner headlines in the media, but at the core of it, a family is mourning the loss of their loved one, and I can only hope that today's verdict will help them with closure. Genesee Circuit Court Judge David J. Newblatt handed down a sentence of life without parole to Jason Harris, and the judge didn't mince words when he sentenced this monster. He declared at the sentencing hearing, the jury's decision had finally exposed you for the selfish, murdering, lying monster you are. That's exactly what Jason Harris is, a selfish, murdering, lying monster, and the judge wasn't afraid to say it. Of course, this monster tried to appeal his conviction. Harris filed an appeal, claiming ineffective assistance of counsel. The prosecutor's office said the court rejected his argument. In February 2024, the Michigan Court of Appeals upheld Jason Harris's conviction, rejecting his claims that he had received inadequate legal representation. The appeals court saw exactly what the trial court saw, that Jason Harris is guilty and deserves to rot in prison for the rest of his miserable life. Jason Harris will likely continue to file appeals because that's what convicted murderers do when they're facing life in prison, but the evidence against him is so overwhelming that it's unlikely any court will ever overturn his conviction. The real tragedy here isn't just Christina's death, it's what this did to her children. Christina left behind 2 children, including a 4-month-old daughter. These children lost their mother to murder and their father to prison. They'll grow up knowing that their father murdered their mother for money. That 4-month-old baby will never have any memories of her mother. She'll only know Christina through photos and stories from family members. And when she's old enough to understand, she'll have to grapple with the fact that her father is a convicted murderer. The older child will have some memories of Christina, but they'll also have to process the fact that the man who was supposed to protect their family was the one who destroyed it. These children are the true victims of Jason Harris's selfishness and evil. They didn't ask for any of this, and they'll spend the rest of their lives dealing with the consequences of their father's actions. Hopefully, Christina's extended family will be able to provide these children with love, support, and stability as they grow up without their parents. The Christina Harris case highlights several important issues about domestic violence and murder. First, it shows how domestic violence can take forms that aren't immediately obvious. Jason wasn't beating Christina, he was slowly poisoning her and planning her death. This is a form of domestic violence that doesn't leave bruises, but is just as deadly and arguably more insidious. Second, it demonstrates the importance of listening to family members and friends who insist that something isn't right about a death ruling. The people who knew Christina best knew she would never use drugs, and their voices were crucial in getting this case reopened. Third, it shows how financial motives can drive people to commit horrific crimes against their own family members. Jason Harris valued money and convenience over his wife's life, and that kind of cold calculation is truly evil. Finally, it illustrates how forensic science continues to evolve and provide new ways to solve crimes. The use of breast milk as evidence was innovative and ultimately decisive in this case. The investigators and prosecutors who thought to test Christina's breast milk deserve enormous credit for their innovative approach to this case. Without that evidence, Jason Harris might have gotten away with murder. Christina Harris deserved better, her children deserved better, but at least her killer will never hurt anyone else again, and her family can have some peace knowing that justice was done. Rest in peace, Christina. Your family's fight for justice was not in vain, and your killer will pay for what he did for the rest of his miserable existence.